ground.
And doing projects for free and doing what you love, you mentioned that it's conceptually separate. And why do you think this is misunderstood by just like clients, for example?
I think one of the unfortunate, and I think it draws into a more broader social discussion about the value of art and how do we value art in our community. And I think, as I said to you, we really do live in a very utilitarian society at this time. And so there's a real emphasis on something needing to have a commercial model in order for it to be considered viable or worthwhile even to do. So for many people, they separate that out conceptually. They say if you love what you do, if you love it, it should be art and you should do it for free because you love it. But if it's commercial, somehow it's separate and somehow you produce something that you almost don't even enjoy doing. But it's got that commercial side to it. And I think it's a real shame that there is that feeling. And also I think, as I mentioned earlier, the industry is largely underfunded. So people, because they love this industry so much, are willing to work for free. So people feel it's justified to pay people very little. And that, again, is a tension that I think a lot of people face.
So how does, funding or the lack of it or everything we talked about limit the creativity aspect of your content, of any independent content producer?
Yeah, I think the most salient point about that is that when you're looking to create a project that's funded, if you're looking, say, through grant applications or if you're looking to be funded through mainstream bodies, part of what you need to do, it's one or the other. Either it needs to be highly niched and tailored to a very specific audience who are going to eat up your content, with a spoon, or alternatively, you have to go for the vanilla flavoured, everyone is going to love this content, so you go for the mass audience option. And I think in that respect, you sort of end up with a very dualistic sense of content. It's either very niche so that you've got a really strong captured audience, or you've got everyone. And so people tend to fall into one or the two categories, tailoring their creativity to the audience, I think.
Like micro-communities?
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, I think when you have, the micro-community, say, you're making something about, I don't know, bikie communities living in rural New South Wales, how many people are going to want to see that? But there will be a community of people who are fascinated by that content and committed to that and will create a community around that particular idea. Conversely, if you want something that everyone is going to see, then you have to do something that has a universal theme, like cooking, for example. We see the success of a show like MasterChef, and that's because it has a very universal theme that most people can relate to at some level. And I think that does limit the creativity in some respects, because you do have to think about your audience before you create the creative product.
Yeah. And you mentioned you have a friend that has the niche target audience of fitness.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that first?
Yeah, sure. Well, a friend of mine has recently launched a fitness website, and in his particular website, he's looking at online fitness models. So that basically means supporting people who already have a gym membership based in Melbourne through online fitness training videos. And he's been very successful in doing that because it's a very niche market. It taps into people's love of fitness, but it's very cleverly designed because it's not a huge financial commitment from people, and also it's scalable because he doesn't have to individually consult each person, but it also provides him with a great platform for him to then also sell his professional training services as well, like fitness training services. So it's a very good website.
Okay, so for you, for Hidden Documentary, what do you think garners the most funding interest and funding opportunities, like topic-wise and little projects, like genres? Yeah,
I think what I've seen, and I think potentially where the website is heading, I think what is the really hot button issue in this industry at the moment, particularly with journalism, is looking at multimedia in its or transmedia in its entirety. And I think that's really where the website is heading. I think Australia is very much behind the US in that respect, at least 5 years or so in terms of what's being produced on the major commercial media websites. So I think we can afford, as independent media producers, we can afford to be very experimental with that. So I'm talking about specifically in terms of creating, fantastic video content, morphing that with animations, using, different types of sound, different types of, mashups, using sound slides, things like that. I think we can afford to be edgier than the mainstream media organisations can. And I think that's where the industry is headed, but we have that flexibility to take our content there faster than a mainstream media organisation does.
Cool. So have you ever explored the option of crowdfunding with your work?
Crowdsource funding? Yeah, I have explored that option several times. There are a couple of websites in Australia that do it. One of them, Yourcom News, which I'm aware of and a member of. They do, and also in the US, there's a lot more organisations that do crowdsource funding, and it is very successful in the US. The differences there are that in the US they've got 300 million to play with. Here we've only got 20 million people. And I think also too, perhaps culturally, Australians are a little bit more conservative with crowdsource funding. I have looked into it, and part of the reason why I haven't necessarily gone down that path is most crowdsource funding is looking for a wow factor project. So they want something that's really kind of unique and contained in itself. So that might mean making a film that's a one-off. The film is completed, it's a complete project, it can be sold as a singular project. One of the most difficult things as independent media producers is that no one really wants to pay for the weekly cost of your lighting or your electricity or your rent or the fact that you have to get a new camera, because they're not exciting things to fund. So when you get crowdsource funding, you are selling your idea or your project to the funders. So the tension there is that you have to make it a project that's exciting, that people are going to want to fund in its entirety, rather than just can you fund me to do this every week? Can you fund me to do interviews every week? That would be great. It's just one of the tensions with that kind of model.
And you mentioned about taking it in the future to advertising and all that. What are your thoughts on product placement advertising?
I don't have a lot of. If you're sort of talking about, moral issues with product placement, I don't really have a lot of issues with that. Part of the reason I think you've got to be realistic with how you approach a story, and I think product placement has been happening in media for many, many, many years. I think you can see now with a lot of commercial videos, particularly music videos, there's a very overt and high level of product placement. But I don't see that as being necessarily a bad thing, because people do need to find, a funding model that makes these things viable. And I think if it doesn't distract too much from the enjoyment of the participant or the audience member who's consuming or viewing that media, then I don't think it's an overly negative thing. I think that would be my comment on particularly on product placement, because I think at the end of the day you need to find a means by which you can support yourself, and if that's endorsing a product that you also believe in and you currently also use, for example, then I don't see that as being necessarily a negative thing.
Do you subscribe to that, or in the future?
Well, hypothetically, it's something I would consider, yes.
Okay. Do you have any of your stuff on YouTube?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you heard of the YouTube partnerships and all that?
Which specific partnerships are you talking about?
Where you get like
monetization of content through the placement of advertisements adjacent to your content on YouTube.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure that I wasn't aware that was the name that's used for it. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I mean, you see that with a lot of particularly popular blog content and particularly popular website content. I used to work overseas, with a very popular international blogger and she's been very successful in monetising her content in that way, using YouTube as a platform. So she, gains 2 million hits a blog post, which is incredible. And so, I definitely have seen that model, and I definitely think that that's also something that you can look at doing as well. My personal pet hate is the advertising that appears over content or before content commences. I just think it's really distracting. I think it puts people off. I don't think it does the advertiser any favour either. I think having something that's adjacent is a lot more visually appealing and aesthetic, and also is less intrusive as well.